The rain fell heavily over the city that evening. People hurried through the crowded streets with umbrellas in their hands, trying to escape the cold weather. In the middle of the busy sidewalk, a thin little boy walked slowly by himself. His clothes were old and faded. His shoes were torn from years of use. On his back, he carried a small worn-out bag filled with old books. Water dripped from his hair as he quietly continued walking forward. Many people looked at him with pity, while others simply ignored him as if he did not exist. As the little boy passed a group of teenagers standing near a store, they began laughing at him. One of them pointed at his torn shoes and mocked him loudly. Another boy shook his head and said that poor children like him would never become successful. Their laughter echoed through the rainy street. The little boy heard every cruel word clearly. For a brief moment, he lowered his head and tightened his hands. The words hurt him deeply, but instead of reacting, he simply kept walking in silence. The boy's name was Daniel. He was only 12 years old, but life had already taught him many painful lessons. Every single day was a struggle for him and his mother. Some nights they did not even have enough food to eat. Sometimes the electricity in their tiny house stopped working because they could not pay the bills. While other children spent their evenings playing games and enjoying life, Daniel spent his time helping his sick mother and trying to survive another difficult day. As Daniel walked through the rain, he suddenly stopped in front of a large glass building in the center of the city. Bright lights shined through the windows. Elegant businessmen entered the building wearing expensive suits and confident smiles. Daniel stared silently at the tall building with wide eyes. Deep inside his heart, he imagined himself standing there one day. Not as a poor boy wearing torn clothes, but as a successful man with a better life. Slowly, a small spark of hope began to grow inside him. At that moment, Daniel quietly made a promise to himself. One day, he would change his life completely. One day, he would prove everyone wrong. The people laughing at him today could not see the determination hidden behind his tired eyes. They saw only a poor little boy, walking alone in the rain. But what nobody knew was this. Years later, that same poor boy would become one of the richest and most respected men in the entire city. Daniel lived with his mother in a very small house near the edge of the city. The house was old and damaged. During rainy nights, water slowly dripped from the roof into small buckets placed on the floor. The walls were cracked and the cold wind entered through the broken windows. Inside the tiny kitchen, there was usually very little food. Some days, Daniel and his mother shared only a small piece of bread for dinner. But despite their difficult situation, his mother always tried to smile in front of him. She never wanted her son to lose hope. Every morning, Daniel woke up before sunrise. While other children were still sleeping comfortably, he quietly prepared water and helped his mother clean the house. Before school, his mother often coughed heavily because of her poor health, but she continued working whenever she could. Daniel worried about her constantly. He knew she was exhausted, yet she sacrificed everything to give him an education. Watching his mother struggle every day slowly became the biggest reason Daniel wanted to change his life. After school, Daniel did not go home to rest like the other students. Instead, he worked small jobs around the city to earn a little money. Sometimes he carried heavy boxes at the market. Other days, he cleaned tables at a small food stall until late evening. The work was tiring, especially for a young boy his age. His hands often hurt, and his body felt exhausted. But whenever he thought about quitting, he remembered his mother waiting for him at home. That thought alone gave him the strength to continue. At school, Daniel's life was not easy either. Many students laughed at his old clothes and worn shoes. Some avoided sitting near him because they thought he was too poor. During lunch breaks, Daniel often sat alone, quietly, while the other children played together. Deep inside, he sometimes felt lonely and embarrassed. But instead of becoming angry, Daniel focused all his attention on studying. He believed education was the only thing nobody could take away from him. Every night after finishing his work, Daniel returned home completely exhausted. But his day was still not over. Under the weak light of an old lamp, he opened his school books and continued studying late into the night. Sometimes his eyes became heavy from fatigue, but he forced himself to keep reading. Outside, the city slowly fell asleep. But inside the tiny broken house, one poor little boy continued fighting silently for a better future. Deep in his heart, Daniel believed that one day, all his sacrifices would finally change his life forever. One afternoon, after finishing his work at the market, Daniel slowly walked home through the center of the city. The weather was cold and dark clouds covered the sky. Cars moved quickly along the busy streets while people rushed past him without paying attention. Daniel's body felt tired from carrying heavy boxes all day, but his mind was somewhere else. As he walked quietly through the crowded sidewalk, something suddenly caught his attention. Across the street stood a huge modern building made of shining glass and steel. It was the tallest building Daniel had ever seen in his life. Daniel stopped walking immediately. Through the giant windows, he could see people wearing elegant suits talking confidently inside the building. Luxury cars arrived one after another near the entrance. The bright lights, beautiful decorations, and expensive atmosphere felt completely different from his own world. For a few moments, Daniel simply stood there silently under the cold wind, staring upward with wide eyes. Deep inside his heart, he wondered what it would feel like to work in a place like that someday. As Daniel continued looking at the building, his imagination slowly began to grow. For the first time in his life, he pictured himself as a successful man. He imagined wearing a clean black suit and walking confidently through those large glass doors. He imagined buying a comfortable house for his mother, so she would never have to suffer again. In his mind, he could already see a completely different future waiting for him somewhere ahead. At that moment, a powerful dream was born inside his heart, but suddenly, several boys standing nearby noticed Daniel staring at the building. They began laughing loudly at him. One of them looked at Daniel's torn clothes and mocked him cruelly. Another boy said that poor people like him could never become rich or successful. Their laughter echoed through the busy street, and several people turned around to look. Daniel felt embarrassed and hurt. For a brief moment, he lowered his head quietly, while listening to every painful word they said. However, something inside Daniel changed that day. Instead of giving up, he slowly lifted his head and looked at the tall building once again. His eyes were no longer filled with sadness. They were filled with determination. Deep in his heart, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. One day he would prove everyone wrong. One day he would escape poverty and build a better life for himself and his mother. The people around him saw only a poor little boy standing alone in the street, but they could not see the burning dream that would one day change his entire life forever. After that unforgettable day in front of the giant building, Daniel's life slowly began to change. His dream became stronger than ever before. Every morning, he woke up earlier than usual and promised himself that he would work harder than everyone else. He understood one important thing very clearly. Nobody was going to change his life for him. If he wanted a better future, he had to fight for it himself. From that moment on, Daniel stopped focusing on the people who laughed at him and focused completely on improving his life little by little. At school, Daniel became one of the most hard-working students in his class. While many students talked, played games, or wasted time, Daniel quietly listened to every lesson with full attention. He wrote careful notes and studied every subject seriously. Even though he often felt tired from working after school, he refused to fall behind. Some teachers began noticing his determination and dedication. Although Daniel rarely spoke about his dreams, His actions slowly showed everyone that he was different from the other students. Every evening after school, Daniel continued working small jobs around the city. Sometimes he carried heavy boxes at the market until his arms hurt badly. Other days he washed dishes at small restaurants late into the night. The money he earned was never enough, but he continued saving every small coin carefully. Life remained extremely difficult for him and his mother. There were still nights without proper meals and days filled with exhaustion. But Daniel kept reminding himself that every sacrifice was bringing him one step closer to his dream. Late at night, while most people in the city were sleeping peacefully, Daniel sat alone under the weak light of an old lamp. He borrowed old books whenever he could because buying new books was impossible for him. Some pages were damaged, and some words were difficult to understand. Still, he continued reading patiently for hours. Sometimes his eyes became heavy with exhaustion, and his body begged him to rest. But Daniel refused to stop. Deep inside his heart, he believed that knowledge was the key that could open the door to a completely different future. Years passed slowly, and Daniel faced many painful moments during that time. Some people continued doubting him. Others laughed at his dreams and told him to accept his poor life forever. There were moments when Daniel himself began questioning whether success was truly possible for someone like him. But every time he felt hopeless, he looked at his mother's tired face and remembered why he started. That memory always gave him strength again. Step by step, day by day, Daniel continued moving forward without realizing that his hard work was quietly preparing him for the opportunity that would one day change his entire life forever. Years passed and Daniel slowly grew into a young man. Life was still far from easy, but he was no longer the same helpless little boy who once walked alone in the rain. Through years of studying and hard work, Daniel had learned many valuable skills and gained experience from every small job he had done. Deep inside his heart, his dream continued burning stronger every single day. He no longer wanted to spend his entire life working for small amounts of money just to survive. Daniel wanted something bigger. He wanted to build a future that could completely change his life and finally give his mother the peaceful life she deserved. One evening, after finishing work, Daniel sat quietly inside his small room, thinking about his future. For many years, he had watched successful businessmen in the city and studied how businesses worked. Slowly, a new idea began forming in his mind. Daniel decided that he wanted to start his own small business. The idea frightened him because he had almost no money and very little support. But at the same time, he knew that if he never took a risk, his life would never change. That night, Daniel made one of the biggest decisions of his life. He promised himself that he would stop being afraid of failure and finally chase his dream seriously. Starting the business was much harder than Daniel expected. Using the small amount of money he had carefully saved over the years, he rented a tiny old room near the market and bought only the most basic equipment he could afford. The room was small, hot, and far from perfect, but to Daniel, it felt like the beginning of a new future. Every morning, he woke up early and worked tirelessly from sunrise until late at night. He handled everything by himself because he could not afford to hire employees. Even though he felt exhausted almost every day, Daniel continued believing that all his sacrifices would eventually be worth it. However, success did not come quickly. During the first few months, very few customers visited his small business. Some days Daniel earned almost nothing at all. Bills slowly began piling up, and the little savings he had disappeared faster than he expected. Many people around him started doubting him again. Some said he was wasting his time chasing impossible dreams. Others told him that poor people like him were not meant to become successful businessmen. Hearing those words hurt Daniel deeply because they reminded him of the painful days from his childhood. As the pressure continued growing, Daniel slowly began feeling afraid. Every night after closing his small shop, he sat alone in silence, worrying about the future. Sometimes he wondered if everyone else had been right about him all along. Maybe he was dreaming too big. Maybe success truly belonged only to rich and powerful people. But whenever Daniel felt close to giving up, he remembered his mother's sacrifices and the promise he had made to himself years ago in front of the giant glass building. That memory gave him strength once again. Even during his darkest moments, Daniel refused to stop moving forward. As the months passed, Daniel's situation became worse and worse. His small business continued losing money, and fewer customers visited his shop each week. The little savings he had worked so hard to collect over many years slowly disappeared until almost nothing was left. Bills covered his small desk like a mountain he could no longer escape. Every morning, Daniel opened his shop hoping things would improve. But deep inside, fear was slowly taking control of his heart. For the first time in many years, he began wondering if his dream had been a terrible mistake from the beginning. One cold evening, heavy rain poured over the city once again. Daniel sat alone inside his nearly empty shop while listening to the sound of rain hitting the windows. The lights inside the room felt dim and lifeless. Around him were unpaid bills, damaged equipment, and shelves filled with products nobody wanted to buy. The silence inside the room felt painful. Daniel lowered his head and covered his face with his hands. After years of struggling, sacrificing, and working without rest, everything seemed to be falling apart right in front of him. Slowly, tears filled his tired eyes. That night, Daniel finally reached the moment he feared the most. He realized he could no longer continue running the business. There was simply not enough money left to survive. The dream he had protected for so many years now felt completely broken. Sitting alone in the darkness, Daniel felt more hopeless than ever before. The cruel voices from his childhood slowly returned to his mind once again. He remembered the people who laughed at him and said, "Poor boys like him would never become successful." For a brief moment, Daniel began believing they might have been right all along. As Daniel quietly sat there in despair, his eyes suddenly noticed something lying on the corner of the table. It was an old photograph of him and his mother from many years ago. The picture was small and slightly damaged, but Daniel immediately remembered that day clearly. His mother had been smiling warmly despite all their struggles. Looking at her face in the photograph, Daniel slowly remembered every sacrifice she had made for him throughout his life. He remembered the nights she stayed hungry so he could eat. He remembered her endless support during his darkest moments. Suddenly, Daniel realized he could not allow himself to give up so easily. Slowly, Daniel stood up from his chair and wiped the tears from his face. Deep inside his heart, something began changing again. He understood that failure was painful, but it did not have to be the end of his story. Instead of running away from his mistakes, Daniel decided to learn from them. That night, while the rain continued falling outside, he made another promise to himself. No matter how many times life knocked him down, he would continue standing up again. Because deep inside, Daniel still believed that somewhere beyond all the pain and failure, his dream was still waiting for him. The next morning, Daniel woke up with a completely different mindset. Although his business was still struggling, something inside him had changed after that difficult night. Instead of feeling defeated, he began thinking carefully about everything that had gone wrong. For the first time, Daniel stopped blaming bad luck and started studying his mistakes seriously. He realized that success was not only about working hard, it was also about learning, adapting, and improving. That realization slowly opened a new door inside his mind. For several weeks, Daniel spent almost every moment observing successful businesses around the city. He carefully watched how shop owners treated their customers, how products were displayed, and how services were improved. Whenever he had free time, he read business books borrowed from the library and took notes late into the night. Little by little, Daniel began understanding things he had never noticed before. He discovered that many of his earlier decisions had been driven by fear and inexperience. Instead of feeling ashamed of his mistakes, he decided to use them as lessons for a better future. Slowly, Daniel started changing the way he managed his small business. He improved the quality of his products and treated every customer with kindness and respect. Even when customers bought only small things, Daniel welcomed them warmly with a smile. He cleaned and reorganized his tiny shop so it looked more inviting and comfortable. Although these changes seemed small, they slowly began creating a different atmosphere. For the first time in many months, a few customers started returning regularly. Daniel noticed that people appreciated honesty, hard work, and genuine kindness more than he had ever realized before. As time passed, more people slowly began hearing positive things about Daniel's small business. Some customers recommended his shop to their friends and family. Others admired his determination and humble personality. Day by day, the empty shop that once felt hopeless slowly became busier. Daniel still worked extremely hard every single day, but now there was something different inside his heart. For the first time in years, he could finally see a small light of hope ahead of him. The dream that once felt impossible no longer seemed so far away. One evening, after closing his shop, Daniel stood quietly outside while looking at the city lights shining in the distance. The cold wind brushed softly against his face, reminding him of the painful night years ago when people laughed at him in the rain. But this time, Daniel smiled quietly to himself. He understood now that success was not built in one single moment. It was built through patience, failure, courage, and the decision to keep moving forward, even when life became difficult. Without realizing it, the poor little boy who once had nothing was slowly becoming the man he had always dreamed of becoming. Years continued to pass, and Daniel's small business slowly grew, beyond anything he had ever imagined. The tiny shop near the market was no longer empty and silent like before. Customers now visited every day, and many people trusted the quality of his work. As his business improved, Daniel carefully saved and reinvested his money, instead of wasting it on expensive things. He remained disciplined and focused, remembering the painful years of poverty he had experienced as a child. Step by step, his small business expanded into something much larger than he had once dreamed possible. As Daniel's company continued growing, he finally hired employees to help him manage the increasing number of customers. Many of the people he hired came from poor backgrounds just like him. Daniel understood their struggles because he had once lived the same difficult life himself. Unlike many business owners, he treated his workers with kindness, patience, and respect. Slowly, his company gained a good reputation throughout the city. People admired not only his success, but also the way he treated others. For Daniel, true success was never only about money. It was about creating opportunities and helping people who had once been forgotten by society. One morning, several years later, Daniel was invited to attend an important business event in one of the largest buildings in the city. As his car slowly stopped in front of the giant glass building, Daniel suddenly froze for a moment. He immediately recognized the place. It was the exact same building he had stared at many years ago, as a poor little boy, standing alone in the rain. The memories from that painful day came rushing back into his mind. He remembered the laughter, the humiliation, and the promise he had made to himself. But this time, everything was different. As Daniel stepped out of the car wearing an elegant black suit, many people greeted him respectfully. Businessmen shook his hand and welcomed him warmly into the building. Some reporters even asked to hear his inspiring story. Daniel walked slowly through the large glass doors with calm confidence. Years ago, he had only dreamed about entering that building someday. Now he was standing there as one of the most successful young businessmen in the city. At that moment, Daniel realized how far he had truly come. The poor little boy everyone once ignored had finally achieved the impossible. But despite all his success, there was one moment Daniel treasured more than anything else. One quiet afternoon, he brought his mother to a beautiful new house on top of a peaceful hill outside the city. His mother looked around the house in complete disbelief, while tears slowly filled her eyes. She could hardly believe that her son, the same little boy who once struggled to survive, had accomplished something so extraordinary. Daniel smiled warmly and gently held his mother's hands. Then he softly said the words he had waited his whole life to say, "Mom, you never have to suffer again." Daniel's story slowly spread throughout the entire city. Newspapers wrote articles about his success, and many people admired the young millionaire who had once grown up in extreme poverty. Some people were inspired by his determination, while others could hardly believe how much his life had changed. But although the world now saw Daniel as a successful businessman, very few people truly understood the painful journey behind his success. They did not see the hungry nights, the endless exhaustion, the tears, or the moments when he almost gave up completely. They only saw the final result. One evening, Daniel stood quietly beside the large window inside his office while looking down at the city lights below. The same city that once ignored him was now calling him an inspiration. For a long moment, Daniel remained silent as memories from his childhood slowly filled his mind again. He remembered walking alone in the rain with torn shoes and old books on his back. He remembered the cruel laughter from strangers and the loneliness he carried inside his heart for so many years. Looking back at his life, Daniel finally understood something very important. Success was not built in comfort. It was built through pain, patience, sacrifice, and the courage to continue moving forward, even when life became unfair. Despite becoming rich and successful, Daniel never forgot the people who were still struggling like he once did. He began helping poor children receive better education and opened small programs to support families living in poverty. Whenever he met children wearing old clothes or carrying worn-out school bags, Daniel saw himself in them. He understood their silent pain better than anyone else. That was why he always treated people with kindness and respect, no matter how poor or unimportant they seemed to others. Deep inside his heart, Daniel knew that every person carried dreams that the world could not see. One day, while walking through the city, Daniel noticed a young boy standing alone in the rain near the sidewalk. The boy's clothes were old and his shoes looked badly worn from years of use. For a moment, Daniel froze completely because the child reminded him so much of his younger self. Slowly, Daniel walked toward the boy and gave him a warm smile. Then he quietly placed an umbrella in the child's hands before gently saying, "Never stop believing in your dreams." The little boy looked up at him with surprise and hope shining in his eyes. At that moment, Daniel realized that sometimes even the smallest act of kindness could change someone's future forever. As the rain continued falling softly over the city that night, Daniel smiled peacefully while looking at the sky above him. Many years ago, he had once been a poor little boy that nobody believed in, but through hard work, courage, and determination, he had completely changed his life. And perhaps the most important lesson of all was this: never judge someone because of their current situation. A poor child today may become a successful person tomorrow. Life can change in ways nobody expects. So no matter how difficult your life may seem right now, never give up on your dreams, because your story is still being written.